uh, awakening process and the experience of shedding the old limiting patterns of life and opening up to what is truly divine within and without. Um, we kind of make it a point here on a Sunday morning to really focus on the fundamentals, as I've been saying over the weeks, and with the hopes of cultivating a spiritual formation, right? So that's really the intention behind these services, is to bring in a direct experience of your own inner divine presence that's oftentimes occluded or covered over by distracting thoughts and conditioned ways of being. And so the spiritual formation is brought about or actualized through information, right? To play on words a little bit. So information is necessary for formation. And the type of information we are selecting to receive, or what I'm offering here on a Sunday morning, will go into forming a certain character, a certain disposition, a certain worldview, a certain ability to perceive and suss out or discern your inner and outer worlds. So information is critical to formation. That's why we have to be very selective in what information we're letting in, because it has impact, whether for good or ill. And the more we become sensitized to the finer ethers of spiritual insight, we begin to understand this directly, viscerally, experientially. The quality of information is definitely going to influence the quality of your character or mood or emotion. And so what I hope to do on a Sunday is curate these deeper teachings from world religion, mythology, wisdom traditions that provide A-class information to bring about this spiritual transformation. And so we're going to be looking at this idea this morning in light of the fundamental, necessary ABC 1, 2, 3s of growing up and transforming into our deeper nature. We'll look through the teachings. Well, first we'll deal with the poetry of Raina Maria Rilke. And then we're going to go into the teachings of Greek Orthodox Christianity, the Urantia book, and the New Testament. So we have quite an array of teachings for you this morning, all in the hopes to show that there is this hidden potential within all of us. And the hidden potential is often defined as a seed. And we're going to be looking at some of the parables of Jesus in the New Testament to bring this out. This seed potential is what we are trying to actualize within ourselves. This is where we will find the abundance of peace, joy, safety, wisdom, power to overcome obstacles in our life, a sense of deep connection to the fabric or presence of life in all things. Like all of that is within potential. It's like a seed waiting to sprout, waiting to be actualized. And like I had said, in this idea of looking at the transcultural connections of spiritual teaching, in Buddhism it's referred to as bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is this aspiration to wake up. It's the divine citta, the enlightened citta or consciousness. And so when there is intention, when there is a direct focus of willingness and wantingness, there occurs this type of impregnation, if you will, a type of fertilization of this citta or this seed of consciousness that begins to grow. And as it grows, our job in this spiritual formation is to make sure nothing blocks or gets in the way or inhibits that growth. That's why last week we spent a whole service on cultivating virtue. Because virtue provides the right conditions for the garden of consciousness. When you have a good garden of consciousness, then the seeds can grow. If you have a lot of weeds and pests and you haven't, tilled your ground and fertilized it, even if you have the potential, you're not going to see any effects in your life. So this is what's really important to recognize, that it is an organic process. We all carry the seed of divine potentiality, but there are certain measures and metrics that we have to meet on our side of the equation in order to actualize this divine potential. God is ever gracious and wants to bestow all that He, she, it is. But we have to provide the vessel and the receptivity and the quality of consciousness or character to be able to interface and embody that gift. So this is what's really, at the heart of these talks, like I had said on Sunday mornings. So let's jump into it. But first, let's become really present as best we can, because it's in the present moment that this divine alchemy, this greater work, the magnum opus, can take place. So begin to breathe consciously. Allow that inhale to go all the way in. Fill up. Feel that breath current go all the way down into the lower stomach. And then as you exhale, you might want to do a few exhales out through the mouth, just allowing yourself to de-stress and to release any tension in mind or body. Relax. So in cultivating this right poise of the mind, there is a middle way between relaxing and being sharp and clear. So we want to fine-tune that relaxed and clear state of mind. Just releasing through the breath a few more times. And also get in touch with this deeper sense of willingness or intentionality that you are the choice maker within this experience of awakening. Your choice making is the executive function of your mind. You elect and veto your reality depending on what you want. So get in touch with the power, this deeper power of choice, and set your intention to choose to know the real you, the divine you, the limitless you, the joyful and powerful you that is in direct relationship with its source and all life. And so it is. Okay, so a little bit from Rilke. Rilke was an Austrian poet, born in 1875, died in 1926 at the early age of 51. His poetry is known to come from this place of deeper realization or the desire to wake up. So let's see here. This one is called The Dwarf's Song. My soul itself may be straight and good, but my heart, my bent over blood, all the distortions that hurt me inside, it buckles under these things. It has no garden. It has no sun. It hangs on my twisted skeleton and terrified flaps its wings. Nor are my hands of much use. Look here. See how shrunken and shapeless they are, clumsily hopping, clammy and fat, like toads after the rain. And everything else about me is torn, sad, and weather-beaten and worn. Why did God ever hesitate to flush it all down the drain? Is it because he's angry at me for my face with its moping lips? It was so often ready to be light and clear in its depths, but nothing came so close to it as big dogs did. And dogs don't have what I need. So this is the beginning of our spiritual journey. It's like, the image is often used of the lotus flower that begins in the swamp or the mud. The dwarf, the unawakened mind, the unregenerate human, the mind that is in the mud or the darkness of the world, right? And what Rilke is talking about here is that there is this divine spark or seed within him. His soul is straight and good, but his heart, his heart, right? I love how he languages this. My heart, my bent over blood, all the distortions that hurt me inside. So there is this perennial war, right? In our Bhagavad Gita class, we're talking about this. The war of darkness and light is occurring within our own inner space. And so we have this tug of war, all of us, within us, between the light and the dark. And what's interesting, I get a hit from John's Gospel here, where in that opening prologue of John's Gospel, it says that the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness did not understand it. And everyone who lives in darkness hides from this light because their deeds are evil. But those who are willing to expose themselves and be vulnerable to this light will come to the light and be transformed and have their minds renewed and no longer live the dwarf's life, right? And this bent over blood becomes, to use the metaphor, the blood of Christ. Like you literally have a transfusion, right? You're divinized. You're no longer a dwarf, you're a child of God or a child of light. This is the great alchemy. This is the transformation that you'll get in all traditions. This is something that you must personally undergo and experience. And what I love about it, he's also bringing in this idea of the garden, that the hurt, bent over heart is buckling under the weight of life. And as a result of its pain and its struggles, it doesn't have any light or sun coming in. And so the seed can't grow. And the soul is hanging on this twisted skeleton, flapping its wings but not able to fly. It's just very potent images. And so this is, of course, like I had said, where the lotus seed starts, in the mud, in the world, in the scotia, in the darkness. Last thing I'll say here, because we're going to be moving upward and onward, but again in John's Gospel, when it says that the light shines in the darkness, the Greek word that I just mentioned, scotia doesn't mean just darkness or lack of light. Within the Johannine or the Gospel of John, it also says that this darkness has forces or spiritual elements to it that are designed to hold you back. Like that's their intentionality within the darkness. So these impulses to vice, these impulses to laziness, these impulses to hurt and harm others, all of this are the seeds within the scotia, within the darkness. So there are forces, like I had said, this tug of war, but it's not just this, darkness, avoidness. It's an intentionality to stay asleep, to be concealed, to continue in vice. And of course, we're going to have to wake up to that as well. As we begin to go onto this spiritual road, we will confront these impulses, and we have to deal with them in a way so as not to be overcome by them, not to live in fear, and not to live in this idea that we have to hurt or blame others or ourselves when we do give in to these impulses, but to know that it is required of us to do our best to cultivate this intention, this desire to overcome our weaknesses and not keep falling prey to them, right? This is what makes this, again, within these teachings, it's called a mind training, right? In Buddhism, it's called lojong, mind training. You have to train, you have to work out, right? You have to build your muscles in order to overcome these foes. And, they say it all the time, the forces of Maya or illusion. They come to help you, right? Yes, they'll devour you and keep you in darkness and, perpetuate vice and problems in your life. But if you're really wanting to wake up and you're intentional, that's the actual resistance you need in order to cultivate this divine power within you. Just like a chick coming out of an egg. If we come along and help that chick come out of its egg, it doesn't have the muscular strength to live. We're going to kill it. But as it struggles to break through its egg, it's using these muscles now that it will need in the next world. So this is why the Scotia, the darkness, is not really an enemy when seen from this perspective. It's actually the necessary ingredients that we need to cultivate and strengthen our spiritual life. Right? But fall prey to it, and you'll be devoured. Right? So don't think, oh, hey, buddy, okay. No, it wants you dead. It wants to consume you and destroy the potentiality within you. But you can transform that. That's the alchemy. You can transmute it. Very powerful, very important. The swan. This laboring through what is still undone, as though legs bound, we hobbled along the way, is like the awkward walking of the swan. And dying to let go, no longer feel the solid ground we stand on every day, is like his anxious letting himself fall into the water, which receives him gently, and which, as though with reverence and joy, draws back past him in streams on either side, while infinitely silent and aware, in his full majesty and evermore indifferent, he condescends to glide. So this again is painting a picture of leaving one world and entering another, leaving a world that is intrinsically unnatural to our being, right? Living in the world of the lower passions and body identity when we are essentially the image of God, right? Buddha nature, Christ consciousness. When we're living in such a reality that denies and ignores that and actually resists that, we are living in a very unnatural environment. And that's why Rilke is comparing it to a swan who's really not made for the land, right? Made for another world. And so as we struggle and labor through this cultivation of virtue and spiritual formation and transformation, we get closer to that crossing point of light, where we can enter the gate and go into the water and find our rightful place. And so beautifully saying it as a dying. So we die to a part of ourselves, this clumsy, unnatural way of thinking and being that for many of us is all that we know about ourselves, right? We start out in the mud and we're identified as the muddy ego. And to die to the muddy ego can be very traumatic when we don't have that willingness, openness, and faith to know that there's something greater than the ego, that we are. Right? Again, from the Bible, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. So there's a power within the mind that actually can draw the essence of that other world into your awareness now. And it can start to go to work and colonize your being so that you know you have direction, you have trajectory. You know that there is this water that you feel more naturally inclined to live in. But in order to get there, we must die as the muddy ego, right? And so it can be traumatic. But just know, one of the only quotes I can remember of Adyashanti, only the ego makes waking up so dramatic. Right? So there's going to be this time of dying to the self, renovating your belief system, opening to something greater than you possibly ever imagined. And so parts of the being that we have clung to, that we've actually used to help ourselves survive in this world and survive the pains and the sufferings that we've encountered along the way, like that's going to have to be looked at. We're going to have to confront these inner traumas and inner fears and shadows and shames. But that's so that we can see them, know that they are not who we are, and that there's something greater being birthed in this process. So we're going to go through birth pangs. And in letting go of these old ways of being does feel like you're dying. And at the same time, you're birthing. So the beauty here is we will then phase into something as we go through this birth canal. We phase into something very gentle, very welcoming, very warm, embracing. This is the swan coming into the right place. The water, which is silent and still, all embracing, right? And it says here, it receives him gently, and which, as though with reverence and joy, draws back past him in streams on either side. When I read that, I think of something very powerful that A Course in Miracles says, that when we phase into the Holy Spirit's way of being, right here and now, the Holy Spirit, it says in A Course in Miracles, saves our past in purified form only. So as our minds die to the muddy ego and we phase into the mind of light, what we then look at as our story, our past, it doesn't go away. We're not oblivious to where we've come from. We see how we grew out of the mud. And we see all of the trouble and struggle and defeats and problems and dysfunctions that were there. But we see it in a purified form. We actually see that it had a purpose. It was these reasons for becoming what we now are as the mind of light. So they all worked and orchestrated together to trigger the awakening. And the Holy Spirit, it says in A Course in Miracles, gives you that divine vision to make these interconnections with all of these seemingly chaotic and disparate parts of your life that made no sense at the time. Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my mother? Why did my dad leave? All of this. Ah, oh. So that there's no loss. And this new environment is giving you the joy that then ripples all the way back into your past. And you'll see joy as your past, even when the ego saw it as the darkness and the pain. Right? Hard to believe when we're still waddling, right? One more from Rilke. A god can do it, but will you tell me how a man can penetrate through the lyre's strings? Our mind is split, and at the shadowed crossing of heart roads, there is no temple for Apollo. Song, as you have taught it, is not desire, not wooing any grace that can be achieved. Song is reality, simple for a god. But when can we be real? When does he pour the earth, the stars, into us? Young man, it is not your loving, even if your mouth was forced wide open by your own voice. Learn to forget that passionate music. It will end. True singing is a different breath, about nothing, a gust inside the God, a wind. Right? This is a little more enigmatic, but nonetheless very powerful, and it leads us to the next stage of our talk this morning. This idea of divine intervention or grace is such a necessary part of the lotus seed growing out of the mud and finding its source above. Right? We all know of this idea of heliotropism, yes? Heliotropism is when you see a flower that naturally turns towards Helios, towards the sun. Right? You see this, yes? Even leaf patterns. If you look at trees that form leaf patterns, they're forming it in a Fibonacci spiral or the golden mean. And what that golden mean or Fibonacci spiral does is it gives the leaves all the opportunity to receive the light. There is within nature a sacred geometry at every scale, and this phi ratio or Fibonacci spiral is literally made within nature with all natural things, how we grow as fetuses in the womb. We follow this. Your ear is a Fibonacci spiral. Many of us know this by now, yeah? But this idea of the sacred geometrical patterning or spiraling within organic life is made to receive light, so that we can all receive light. And we all have this natural inclination to turn towards Helios, towards the sun, the great central sun. And actually, it's so appropriate here that Rilke uses Apollo, right? The god Apollo in ancient Grecian mythology is the sun. And so how do we turn towards this sun? How do we awaken to this presence within? And it's through this act of grace, right? We can't do it through our own desire. We can't even do it by being loving in the world, he says. We actually have to open to something greater than ourselves. He says there is a different song. There is true singing that comes with a different breath. Right? So this is what's really fantastic when you realize that this struggling up from the darkness and the mud and facing titanic forces and demonic impulses and whatever else you might think is going on in this awakening process, grace trumps all. Grace is necessary to bring us into our full flowering. And so we're all intrinsically, again, naturally desiring this sun. And in order to reach it and turn towards it, we have to open to grace. I'll go into a little bit of a more esoteric idea. I think many of us here know about this already. But you know about Kundalini, yeah? Kundalini is this spiraling energy that's at the base of the spine. It's supposedly asleep. It's the serpent power, the Shakti, the divine mother, the goddess energy, our spiritual power. And it's said in the tantric traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism that it's coiled at the base of the spine. And through this practice of awakening Kundalini, it moves up the tree of the spine and it awakens these subtle centers or chakras or wheels of energy that are part of our subtle anatomy. And it will come into a full flowering when the goddess meets the god in the brain or the third eye, and our thousand-petaled lotus flowers like the great nimbus that you see within all the pictures of the saintly. Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, they all have the nimbus. And it's the awakened spiritual force, right? The seed has grown. The lotus leaves the mud of the Muladhara, and it goes through its process of awakening into its divine potential. Yeah? Why I'm bringing this up here is that you often hear about these crash and burn stories when people are awakening their Kundalini too early, or they haven't purified their vessel, and their lives are out of balance, and they're not living with the utmost virtue and integrity. And when you are living with this vice or out of integrity, your body is not ready for the high voltage of your spiritual potential. And you often hear these stories of going insane or having nervous reactions that you'll have twitches for the rest of your life, or you can't sleep anymore, or it hurts just to hear music or whatever. Like, all of these stories have been written. One famous book is by Gopal Krishna, where you could go on YouTube and listen to his talks. He had a Kundalini experience that was, tragic for a long time. Why I bring that up is because in the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, this is, an important part of understanding the role of grace. That the awakening of your divine energy, when it's guided from above, you will avoid all of these pitfalls. So don't try to do it on your own. Don't try to raise your own Kundalini power. Allow grace to conduct you through the straits and the narrows of your own psyche so that you come to rest and you can trust every moment that everything that's happening in your life is perfectly timed, perfectly orchestrated, perfectly arranged by the Supreme Power. You'll begin to feel this if you don't already, that grace is always there. We just need to turn to it, like the plant turning to the sun. I don't know about you, but I'm having a good time. I'm so appreciative for you guys because you allow me to enjoy what I love most, right? Like, this is hopefully an energy exchange. This giving and receiving is so vital. And I've mentioned this before. A Course in Miracles says, when you're in the role of teacher or somebody who's sharing these sacred teachings, we oftentimes don't think that the listeners are so important to the process. This would it would have no impact, no use, if I'm just up here spouting with my ego and being in my own echo chamber. What really matters is you're allowing me to give you these gifts, and if you're receiving them with a good heart, it strengthens this in our world, and it brings to light who we really are on a more massive scale. And when we share these ideas, as it says in A Course in Miracles, they strengthen. And as we strengthen these ideas, we transform our world. We don't transform our world by blaming and railing against the machine, right? And trying to expose the hypocrisy and the corruption and the criminality that now is like all surfacing. The only way that we can come out of the mud is not condemn the swamp creatures, but to recognize that they too have the divine potential. And by sharing these ideas, they will either become disempowered or they will join with us. But there's no hatred or blame. This is something that we're also going to be discussing in our Bhagavad Gita class on Wednesday. That Arjuna is called to fight these forces of darkness, but not with anger or hatred. Total compassion, right? You don't succumb and roll over to them because they'll devour you. They want you dead. They want to consume you. But at the same time, you don't hate or condemn them and try to do them bloody murder, right? There's this power that we will display when we come to this place of grace and our deep desire to wake up. Okay. So this is taken from Saint Maximus the Confessor. He was a Greek, early Greek father, Christian father, and considered one of the greats of the ancient Christian church. This is a book on the cosmic mysteries of Jesus Christ. And the reason why I'm bringing in St. Maximus in our conversation is because when we cultivate this seed and it begins to sprout, what's part of the grace experience is that the seed itself has its own inner pattern. It knows what to do. It doesn't need our lower mind to tell it what to do. That's why what Rilke was saying, when the swan enters the water, it becomes quiet. This is how the mind can then be guided. The ego mind chatters all the time, and it thinks it knows what things are for and what it needs and what it needs to do, even when it comes to enlightenment. But the ego's blind. The ego's spiritually dumb. It doesn't know the other world. It only knows the mud. So part of the process is going into what the Greek fathers would call apophasis, this total quieting. And when we're quiet and the seed becomes actualized, then we can begin to realize that it has, again, I'll throw out another $10 word. It's a Greek word, you may have heard it, a telos, that this seed has a telos. We first get this through Aristotle's philosophy. And the example Aristotle uses about a telos is, if you have an acorn, the acorn has a telos. It's to become an oak tree. So if you plant an acorn in the soil, give it the right conditions, right? Everything is optimal for the acorn's gestation and growth. Over time, that telos, that trajectory that is embedded within the program or the code of the acorn will become an oak tree. You can count on it. It's there. Just like the lotus seed in the mud will become a lotus flower. It's already there. So this divine seed within us is already a fully divinized human being. Right? So what the Greek fathers recognized, because they drew from Aristotle and Plato and other Greek philosophers, they realized that they were onto something. This was a keen insight. And what they added, these Greek patristic fathers, the early Christian masters, they said telos ends in theosis, right? This is what I just said. Telos ends in a total awakened, Christed, divine being, right? The full flowering of your consciousness. So this is why we do what we do when we're still waddling in the mud, because the trajectory within us is pulling us towards this. And so a little bit from Maximus, see what you think. So what Maximus is going to tell us here is that in order to go through this process of awakening, and remember, he's using Christian terminology, but see that you don't get stuck at the words or the ideas, right? He's actually pointing to something essential. And when he says baptism, he's meaning this real change within your psyche where you're no longer going to serve the ego, you're going to serve your higher self. And the grace as a result of that choice comes in. You chose to wake up. And as soon as you choose to wake up, you're no longer alone, as it says in A Course in Miracles. Divine help has now entered your life. You're baptized. You're set on a different course now. You have a higher will that is now functioning within you. Not just your potential, but angelic and divine assistance is guiding you, pulling you, assisting you. So he says here, in effect, and this is actually the introduction, it's not directly from Maximus. In effect, baptism plants the seed of a grace that will continue to unfold itself in the one who wants to wake up, the penitent, and fruit-bearing life of the believer. Baptism actually entails two dimensions, two births in one. On the one hand, it implants through the believer's faith the fully potential grace of adoption in the Spirit. On the other hand, it begins the actualization of that grace, which must grow and continue through the believer's active assimilation to God. That's an interesting idea when he talks about assimilation. So we're like spiritual infants, or like a fetus that's just been fertilized. And what we're assimilating is all of the experiences of our life. They become our food. And so when we want to wake up, we begin to interpret everything that's happening in our life as food to strengthen this idea of awakening. That's why you're never now threatened by anything. Because what it's going to help you do is assimilate God. So whatever's showing up in your life, whatever troubles or trials or relationship breakdowns or difficulties, that's the arena. That's the laboratory. That's the necessary ingredient that you need to assimilate. When reframed like that, you're never overcome by the effects of the outer world. You actually tell the effects of the outer world what you're going to use them for. And as a result of the power of your faith and the ability to reframe, you're no longer alone, so you're going to have divine assistance. So what would have broken you and defeated you actually ends up launching you into a new orbit of spiritual knowing and trust. Right? And again, just words until you've experienced this. And I could see many of us have. It's a way of recognizing that in whatever tradition we're learning from, this was understood. This was mapped out. So here's an important point of this. It says now that we become active assimilators of God in our life, right? Everything is now being assimilated for our growing up into our divine nature. And then he says, this involves a conversion of free choice. Like our choice making has to be converted. I know, that's one of those words, right? It's like, when you put a battery on your tongue, it's like conversion. It has that, right? But look at the word and what it's pointing to. It's conversion so that you're no longer willing to stay asleep. The conversion of your choice is above all else, I want to wake up. I want to know who I am. I want to be free. I don't want to live in darkness and pain and suffering. I don't want to be insane. Because what's the definition of insanity? We don't know who we really are. Right? This is part of coming to terms with this awakening process. When we get really quiet and we look at who we thought we were, it's like it's just a bundle of experiences that has no real solid core. It's like you peel an onion. And you're peeling all of these beliefs and opinions, which oftentimes aren't even yours. They were given to you. Your name was given to you. Like, this is what's beautiful about Buddhism and the deep looking, right? You begin to peel away the layers of this self that you call you. And you realize there was nothing there. It was all illusion. It was all smoke and mirrors. I just never examined it. Now that I have examined who I thought I was, I'm no longer going to choose to be this false self. It's false. Never was me to begin with. My will get converted naturally to wanting to wake up. Right? It will be repurposed. All right, so finally here. So this conversion of free choice and your intentionality, as well as the acquisition of a knowledge based on and enriched by a direct spiritual experience, that's what creates the new birth in the mind. Your choice making and your hidden potential. Let's see here. Do I want to read anything else? Okay, so clearly for Maximus, the baptismal vocation reveals a synergy of the Holy Spirit and the will of the graced Christian. Again, the one who wants to wake up, right? See beyond the terminology. So there's a synergy between the divine seed and the divine spirit within you and your choice making. It's like they get alchemized. And so, as a result of this, we have to discipline our will. Right? This is what becomes a little unpopular. We actually have to clean up. In order to have this spiritual power and presence dwell within us, it can't dwell in filth. It can't dwell in shadow and dimness. And so we have to clean up, right? So this is why when we do want to wake up and we do have this mergence with our divine will or the spark, you begin to feel like there are certain elements that begin to show up and you can't really do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. Oh, hanging out with those guys. They kind of bring out the worst in me. So those relationships might start to fade a little bit or transform maybe. But you'll find that there's a total restructuring and reorientation, and these things will become glaringly obvious if you're willing to look at yourself. The Spirit will point them out. We have to purify. We have to meet the conditions of the right soil and the right environment so that the seed can reach its telos. Right? Discipline the will. No longer allow doubts to run me down. I no longer allow the vanity of the ego to be the primary reason why I live. Right? All of these things will show up. And you'll feel the resonance of these things viscerally. Right? Directly, immediately, intuitively. Oh, yeah, Oh. Even if we have the Spirit of adoption, who is himself the great seed, right, capital S, for enduing those begotten through baptism with the likeness of the one who sowed the seed. All right? But do not present him with a will cleansed of any inclination or disposition to something else. We therefore, even after being born in this higher birth, risk shipwreck. Right? So even if you start having these great experiences and your mind starts going into these higher places, if we don't stay disciplined and committed and vigilant, you can get taken down. You know, I watch it in my life. I've seen it going on in other people's lives, really fired up to wake up. And then a little while comes along. It's kind of like that parable that Jesus tells. Some seed falls on shallow ground. Rocky soil, shallow ground, and it immediately sprouts up. Like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I'm really starting to feel divine presence in my life. And then it says, well, then the rains come and the waters beat on those seeds. Here, let me just read that real quick so I don't butcher it. He says, other seeds fell on rocky ground without much soil. They sprang up quickly because the soil was not deep. But when the sun came up, they were scorched, and because they did not have sufficient root, they withered. So a shallow spirituality, which would be like a narcissistic spirituality, or what Chogyam Trungpa called spiritual materialism. Like, we want to do this for our own ego. My ego wants to enlighten, because then I'd be a special guy, a special me, an awakened me, powerful. I would have lots of people in the audience. They would love me, right? Believe me, I went through that phase. That's why I say it. And it's grace that it, breakdown. So, when we have a shallow spirituality, oftentimes we see this, we have an immediate reaction. This is amazing. I love it. I'm on board. Right? I've often shared the story after a Course in Miracles class, which we teach on Monday night here. People will come up and go, oh my God, where do I get this book? I can't wait. See you next week. And never come back. And it's this idea that Jesus is talking about in the parable. No depth. Because when the sun comes, that's the trials. That's when you start to really look at yourself, right? It gets bright. And when it gets bright and we want to keep our evil deeds, we don't want to clean up, remember what we said from John's Gospel, we don't go to the light because our deeds are evil. And we actually want to hide because we love evil more than good. All right? So this is where the enthusiasm also needs to become deepened, right? And in order to deepen, we're going to go through trials and struggles and difficulties. That's what's going to give us the muscle. That's what's going to give us the ability to really go to where we're going, right? So we don't shirk that. We assimilate it. We use it as food. It's very tantric in that sense. Okay. So a little bit more from Matthew's Gospel here. So you know this story, I'm sure, the seed, the parable of the sower. So the sower goes out and he sows all of the seed, right? Very agrarian image here. And some seed falls along the path. Now the path is the common road. It's where everybody is. And as a result of this seed going on the ordinary, everyday path, he says that the birds of the air immediately come and gobble up the seed. Never has a chance to open up and actualize. Other seed, like we just said, fell on rocky ground. Not much depth, not much soil, and it gets scorched as soon as it comes up because they didn't have sufficient root. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and they grew up, and the thorns choked them. But other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100 times as much, some 60, and some 30. The one who has ears had better listen. Right? Don't mind my stomach. Then the disciples came to him and said, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" This is very important. Jesus replied, "You have been given the opportunity to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but they have not. For whoever has will be given more and will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has, will be taken from him. For this reason, I speak to them in parables. Although they see, they do not see. And although they hear, they do not hear, nor do they understand. And concerning them, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will listen carefully, yet will never understand. You will look closely, yet will never comprehend. For the heart of this people has become dull. They are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they would not see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But your eyes are blessed because they see, and your ears because they hear. Right? So what he's driving at here is these esoteric secrets, these deeper mysteries of the kingdom of God. They can't be opened up to those that are outside, only because they haven't cleaned up yet. They haven't converted their wills yet. They haven't made themselves ready yet. But when you have turned to really listen, and your hearts are pure, and you receive this word of faith with deep devotion, then these mysteries will naturally begin to open up for you. And the birds of the air won't gobble up your seed, and you won't sprout and wither and all that, right? So all of that to say, these are the preliminary teachings of getting on the path. And I use that word because that's what they use in the Tibetan tradition, Ngondro, these preliminary teachings. They actually spend a lot of time on what Jesus was just talking about. They use the image of a vessel. And when you're ready to receive the Dharma, right, the sacred teaching that will awaken your divine seed or bodhicitta or aspiration to enlighten, the vessel can be messed up, it says in the Ngondro, the preliminary teachings. It could be turned over so that the mouth of the vessel's on the ground and the Dharma is pouring over the vessel, but none of it's getting in. They hear, but don't comprehend. Or the vessel can have a crack in it. So the Dharma teachings get poured in, but then they run right out. You forget everything you just heard. Or the vessel might have some toxins and poisons left over from its former use. And when the pure Dharma teachings go in, they turn sour and poisonous. They're misused, right? It's only the clean and pure vessel that is ready and, sufficient, as Jesus was saying, to receive the mysteries of the kingdom, or the mysteries of the Dharma, right? So become such a vessel if you're not already. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, remember you could just click that link below and donate to the 8 a.m. service. We thank you for that very much. Appreciate it. Any thoughts, reflections, comments? We bless this offering. We charge it with the intention that it be used in whatever form to stimulate the awakening process and to bring light and blessing into the world. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, we can rise and seal the deal. And as we close our eyes, we tunnel our attention inward to the source at the center of the heart, where this divine seed is awaiting its awakening. And we just recognize that deep within this seed, the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us wherever we are. God is. Amen. Tomorrow night, 7:15 p.m., Course in Miracles right here.